This recording is the last in a set of recordings that are covering the various organs or tissues that are involved in hormone production. We're going to start with the pineal gland because it is, it's a endocrine organ. But then we're going to follow with hormones that are secreted by organs which have secondary endocrine functions. So first we'll start with the pineal gland. So the pineal gland is up in the brain. It's actually part of what we refer to as your epithalamus. And it's called a pineal gland because it resembles a pine cone. It's really, really tiny. And that produces the hormone melatonin. Please do not confuse that with melanin. So melatonin is a hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycles, or we call your circadian rhythms. This is important for allowing you to go to bed at an appropriate time. But melatonin can affect things like your emotions. It can affect mood. Definitely is going to affect your sleep. And if your sleep is affected, that's going to obviously affect your emotions and your mood. Now, the secretion of melatonin is regulated by daylight. So in order to have proper melatonin production, you have to look at a certain wavelength of light at appropriate time. So what can happen is the circadian rhythms or your sleep-wake cycles can be disrupted if your exposure to sunlight is disrupted. So if you expose yourself to certain wavelength of light at night, so people who work at night, and they have looking at certain wavelengths of light, that can affect the melatonin production. Not receiving the proper amount of sunlight or exposure to sunlight in the morning. So you got, like my husband, he'll sleep until like noon or 1, and then he'll stay up all night, and he can't fall asleep at a normal time. And so it's because he's not waking up like he should, not getting exposure to the sunlight. His melatonin levels are just wacky. So he has a very weird circadian rhythm. Some other things you've heard of: shift work disorder, blind people. If you ever heard of something, you can look it up, something called non-24. So if you're blind, obviously you're not being exposed to that sunlight, so that can affect their circadian rhythms too. But melatonin and its effects on sleeping is very interesting. So if you're actually interested, you can do some more research on that. But it's just pretty much what we're going to limit to it for this. Now we're going to look at briefly at some other hormones, but these are produced by endocrine tissues of systems that it's actually a secondary function. The endocrine function is just secondary. So the first one is the thymus. Now the thymus is a major organ that's part of your lymphatic or immune system. This is actually a not very accurate drawing of the thymus because in an adult it's not that big. It's very small. It gets smaller as you get older. The thymus is located in what we call the mediastinum, and that produces hormones called thymosins. And what the thymosins do is they stimulate the maturation of T lymphocytes. T lymphocytes are cells of your immune system, and they're part of what we call cell-mediated immunity. So very important in your immune system. The T cells were originally produced the lymphocytes were produced in your bone marrow, but they differentiate into T cells in your thymus, and the thymosins help with that. Now the gastrointestinal tract produces a number of different hormones, and this only lists 3. I will talk about these hormones when we do digestive system, so do not worry about these. But the gastrointestinal tract do produce a number of different hormones, but they're specifically used to regulate motility or secretions that are involved in digestion. The heart produces something called natriuretic factor, or atrial natriuretic factor, or atrial natriuretic peptide. The term natriuretic means it's Kind of, if you ever remember the word diuretic, where someone pees a lot. Well, here you're excreting a lot of sodium in the urine. And so the ANF, some will refer to as ANF or AMP. It's a peptide hormone that's secreted by the heart, and it targets the kidneys, and it helps to increase the loss of sodium, and also as a result of that, water, and it helps to get blood pressure and blood volume down. Now, adipose tissue, it's very kind of interesting, is one of the things that adipose tissue produces is something called leptin. So leptin is if that actually says, okay, you've eaten enough. We don't need to eat anymore. So it decreases food intake. Don't think that this would be the magic pill that people that are obese is because they don't produce enough leptin. They've done a lot of different research, and it's very rare for someone to have a leptin deficiency, which causes obesity. There's a lot of factors involved in obesity. But leptin is a hormone produced by adipose tissue. But another thing that I want to talk about, because I'm going to tie it in when we do the reproductive system, is adipose tissue has an enzyme called aromatase. And aromatase is an enzyme that converts androgens, I'm going to be very general, to estrogens. So for example, converts testosterone to beta estradiol. And that's actually important in males. Males have to convert some of their testosterone to estrogens or beta estradiol, because that helps with the closing of the epiphyseal plates. And we'll also talk about the role of this in females. But adipose tissue can convert androgens, it's not just testosterone, to estrogens. And this is found in adipose tissue. And I just want you to think about it, is just visualize that you have some of those overweight men and they have breasts. They have a lot of adipose tissue, and they're producing, so a lot of their testosterone is being converted to estrogens, which can lead to the development of breasts. Okay, just something to think about. Now, kidneys produce some hormones too. Now, kidneys obviously major role in the urinary system, water balance and electrolyte balance and excretion of waste products, but it does also produce a couple hormones, or 3 hormones. One of the things it does is it increases the secretion of something called erythropoietin. Actually, I'm gonna do this one first. Where's my picture? It's actually right here, sorry. So if you have reduced oxygen or reduced blood flow to the kidneys, it's not going to get sufficient amount of oxygen. Erythropoietin, which is abbreviated is EPO, will be stimulated, and it targets the bone marrow, the red bone marrow, and it stimulates the production of red blood cells. Okay, that would help to carry more oxygen. Another thing that is produced by the kidneys is calciferol, which I've mentioned previously. So parathyroid hormone stimulates the production of calciferol in the kidney, and calciferol stimulates the calcium and both calcium and phosphate absorption in the gastrointestinal tract. The other thing that is produced by the kidneys that we'll talk about way more in depth later, so don't worry about this now, is renin. So we'll talk about this ad nauseum. So renin is also produced by it, and that's going to be important in helping with blood pressure regulation and regulation of blood volume. So we'll just leave it there because we're going to talk about it a lot more in depth later. Now, the ovaries and testes produce the testosterone and estrogen, progesterone. We'll talk about those when we do the reproductive system. So we're just going to leave it here. So this is the last bit, the recording for just going over the different hormones that are part of the endocrine system.